La 7300.
The 7,353rd meeting of the Security Council is resumed. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Tay Brooks-Erihun, Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, and Mr. Ivan Simonovic, Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. It's so decided. I'm going to give the floor now to Mr. Tay Brooks-Erihun.
Mr. President, members of the Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Security Council meets at a time when the situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is attracting increased world attention and concern. The report of the Secretary General to the General Assembly on the situation of human rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was issued earlier this month. The General Assembly adopted the resolution on the human rights situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on 18 December, and on 19 December, the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States issued a report alleging that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was responsible for the recent cyber attack targeting Sony Pictures Entertainment. The Secretary General is aware of the FBI report. He's also aware that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has denied any involvement. The United Nations is not privy to the information on which the FBI's conclusions are based. However, the rise in the incidence and severity of cyber attacks is of increasing concern. Mr. President, the Commission of Inquiry established by the Human Rights Council gave voice to the many victims of grave human rights violations and provided a roadmap for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to adhere to universal human rights standards. The Commission concluded that, and I quote, "The gravity, scale, and nature of the violations reveal a state that does not have any parallel in contemporary world." End of quote. The Commission also reframed and changed the tone of the discussion on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's not just the nuclear issue that deserves international attention and action. The discussion in the Security Council today allows for a more comprehensive assessment and action when addressing the security and stability concerns in the Korean Peninsula. In keeping with its obligations under international law, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has a responsibility to protect its population from the most serious international crimes. The international community also has a collective responsibility to protect the population of the Democratic Republic of Korea, People's Republic of Korea, and to consider the wider implications of the reported grave human rights situation for the stability of the region. Mr. President, for the first time in 15 years, the Foreign Minister of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea attended the General Assembly debate in September this year and met with the Secretary General, confirming the commitment of his country to sustaining and continuing the dialogue. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea has also undertaken active diplomatic activities around the world, including in Europe, East Africa, and Northeast Asia, and engaged more substantively with the United Nations human rights system, including the Universal Periodic Review. These signals of engagement offer an important opportunity for the United Nations and the wider international community to redouble efforts towards building trust, dialogue, and cooperation on all tracks. It's also an opportunity for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to work with the international community to improve the human rights situation and the living conditions of the people of the country. Mr. President, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has issued official statements making clear its objection to the General Assembly resolution on the human rights situation in the country. And on the 9th of December, the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry gave a strong reaction to the meeting of the Security Council today. While the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has raised the possibility of conducting a fourth nuclear test in its statements immediately before and after the third committee vote, its recent statements have refrained from such references. The Secretary General notes that the international community is firm and united in affirming that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea cannot have the status of a nuclear weapon state in accordance with the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. There is strong international consensus on the need for the verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. In this context, the six-party talks remain a viable mechanism to achieve irreversible denuclearization and to maintain peace and security in the Korean Peninsula. The 2005 joint statement remains a solid framework for addressing these issues through dialogue and negotiations. While the non-proliferation, political, human rights, economic, and security challenges are interrelated and mutually reinforcing, the United Nations urged member states to increase humanitarian assistance for those in need in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The United Nations-led humanitarian response to the country is of high quality and life-saving, with a measurable impact on the lives of the most vulnerable. The response, however, is hampered by a funding deficit which has been exacerbated by sanctions. Mr. President, next year marks the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, the founding of the United Nations, as well as the division of the Korean Peninsula. The Korean question has remained unresolved for so long, and the situation on the peninsula remains fragile and volatile. Inter-Korean relations have remained deadlocked and family members separated for far too long. Restarting credible dialogue and meaningful engagement would be an important step to overcome the current standoff on the Korean Peninsula and should go hand in hand with efforts to ensure accountability. The United Nations will continue its engagement on both fronts and counts on the active support of the international community, especially the countries in the region. Sustained international efforts would be important in supporting these efforts. All concerned parties should work to make 2015 a pivotal year to improve the human rights situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and to move forward a denuclearized and peaceful Korean Peninsula. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie.
I'd like to thank Mr. Zerun for his briefing, and now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Ivan Simonovic.
President, let me mention that High Commissioner is sorry that he could not address the Council today himself. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, earlier this year, the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea spoke very vividly to this Council about, I quote, "savageness and brutality of crimes against humanity committed against Korean people during the Second World War." Ambassador Ri listed massacres, abduction, forcible recruitment, forced labor, and sexual slavery, which he said trampled on the dignity of Korean women and of the Korean nation as a whole. This is the kind of compassion that we are seeking for the victims in Korean Peninsula today. Victims of extermination, of murder, enslavement, and torture, of rape, forced abortions, and other sexual violence. Victims of persecution of political, religious, racial, and gender grounds. People who have been forcibly transferred, whose loved ones have been abducted or disappeared without trace. People who have been deliberately starved for long periods. According to the Human Rights Council's commissions of inquiry, these crimes have been perpetrated in the DPRK in a widespread and systematic manner as deliberate policy directed by the highest levels of government. In many instances, they constitute crimes against humanity. Before you today is the report of that commission. Rarely has such an extensive charge sheet of international crimes been brought to this Council's attention. It documents a totalitarian system that is characterized by brutally enforced denial of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, as well as the rights to freedom of opinion, expression, information, and association. Songbun classification, which calibrates perceived loyalty to the states, generates extensive and damaging discrimination throughout the country. Where it intersects with gender-based discrimination, it increases the vulnerability of women and sharply limits their opportunities. The DPRK government has also used denial of the right to food to control and coerce its people. Actions by officials have caused the death of hundreds of thousands of people, according to the Commission, particularly during the famine of the 90s, and have inflicted permanent physical and psychological injuries on survivors. In November 2013, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme found that 84% of households, 8 to 9 families out of 10, were not consuming enough food. According to the latest National Nutrition Survey, in 2012, 28% of children under 5 suffered stunting from malnutrition, and almost 1 woman in 4 had been so starved that she risked giving birth to premature or underweight children. DPRK nationals who managed to flee the country may fall victim to trafficking networks, and women often face forced marriage or forced prostitution. If forcibly returned, they face persecution, torture, forced abortion, prolonged arbitrary detention, and even summary execution. The Commission expressed its deepest horror at the DPRK's political prison camp system, Kwan Liso, whose inmates suffer deliberate starvation, forced labor, executions, torture, rape, forced abortion, and infanticide. The Commission estimated that hundreds of thousands of prisoners have perished in these camps over the past 50 years, and that they currently hold 80,000 to 120,000 people. DPRK representatives have acknowledged the existence of what they term reformatories. I firmly believe that with honesty, transparency, and international assistance, we can find a way to dismantle the camp system and release and rehabilitate prisoners. Other countries in the region have shown that it is possible to release thousands of political prisoners and roll back systems of administrative detention. Mr. President, the Commission of Inquiry has highlighted the connections between the human rights situation in the DPRK and security in the region overall. The sustained military focus and nuclear priority of the government have been pursued at the expense of the economic and social rights, as well as the lives and well-being of its people. Comprehensive human rights violations by the DPRK have had significant impact on the regional peace and security, from international abductions and enforced disappearances to trafficking and the outflow of desperate refugees. If we are to reduce tensions in the region, there must be movement towards real respect of human rights in the DPRK. This is deserving of the Security Council's fullest attention and action. Excellency, since the Commission of Inquiry report was published in March, with the prospect of action by this Council, the DPRK authorities have shown promising new signs of engagement with international human rights mechanisms. They engaged productively in its second Universal Periodic Review in the Human Rights Council, and for the first time accepted numerous recommendations addressing humanitarian assistance, women and children's rights, health and education. DPRK representatives also held an unprecedented meeting with the Special Rapporteur. The DPRK also indicated, for the first time, its willingness to accept technical assistance from OHCHR. Moreover, bilateral negotiations between the DPRK and Japan have reopened the investigations into alleged abductions of Japanese nationals. I hope this process will be conducted in transparency and good faith, leading to truth and redress for the families. It will also be important to bring clarity to reported abductions from the Republic of Korea and elsewhere. All these developments may present an opportunity for real change. Other countries in the region have shown in the recent past that it is possible to dismantle deep-seated structures of repression and receive assistance in reform, leading to new recognition and standing in international community. My office will naturally give all possible support to such progress, together with the international human rights mechanisms. And here I note that the Special Rapporteur should be invited to visit DPRK without preconditions. In March 2018, OHCHR will establish a field-based structure in Seoul, as mandated by Human Rights Council Resolution 2525. This will follow up the Commission of Inquiry, boost support to the Special Rapporteur, and serve as a hub for documentation, technical assistance, and advocacy to advance accountability and improve human rights in DPRK. Excellencies, real change in the human rights situation in the Democratic Republic of Korea will require not only reform. It demands justice. For the first time, a UN-mandated body has qualified human rights violations in the DPRK in terms of international criminal law. This is significant in establishing individual and institutional accountability, but it also invokes the international community's responsibility to take action to prevent and punish such crimes. An overwhelming majority of member states in the Human Rights Council, as well as General Assembly, as well as victims, survivors, and civil society organizations around the world, have asked that you, the Security Council of the United Nations, take action on this report, including by referral to the International Criminal Court and by adopting targeted sanctions. As we have seen this year, concerted actions by the international community can have a powerful deterrent effect and may begin to change the policy of DPRK. I believe that the Security Council can advance two crucial goals: accountability and engagement for reform. Today's discussion has placed the DPRK on notice. The Council should carefully monitor developments in the coming months to see whether engagement leads to real change or should take further action. Distinguished members of the Council, the people of DPRK have endured decades of suffering and cruelty. They need your protection. And the cause of justice, peace, and security in the region requires your leadership. Thank you.
Je remercie
I thank Mr. Simonovic for his briefing. I now give the floor to the members of the Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Assistant Secretary General Taib Rukzerahun and Assistant Secretary General Ivan Simonovic for their briefings. Today's meeting is an historic step forward for the international community's efforts to consider the situation in the DPRK and its broader implications. It also sends a vital message to the people of North Korea that the international community is aware of their suffering and stands in solidarity with them. By meeting, the Council recognises that the dangerous threat to international peace and security posed by the DPRK regime is not limited to its weapons programs and proliferation activities, but that this threat also flows from its atrocious treatment of its people and its determination to use every means possible to resist action it perceives as a challenge to its authority. The DPRK is in effect a totalitarian state which uses violence and repression against its own citizens to maintain itself and its threatening military apparatus in power. The regime's atrocities against its own people have created an inherently unstable state. The regime's system of repression enables its proliferation policies, and its deprivations of its people fund those policies. Some have asserted the Council has no business considering this issue, but Australia strongly disagrees. History shows that human rights violations of the type and scale we're seeing in North Korea have reverberations well beyond the country in which they are committed. They mount to a rejection of international norms which underpin stable societies, and they undermine peaceful relations between states. As we have seen time and again, serious violations of human rights serve as a warning sign of instability and conflict, especially in the absence of accountability for such violations. With the publication of the seminal report of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the DPRK, the international community now has a comprehensive, evidence-based assessment of the systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations being committed by the North Korean regime. The report is deeply disturbing and compels a response. The Commission's findings on the extent of the DPRK's indoctrination program highlight a deliberate strategy to control the population to secure its hold on power. The program seeks to instill national hatred, constituting incitement to discrimination, hostility and violence and propaganda for war. The Commission's report lays bare the depraved nature of the DPRK regime's tools of control, including the denial of access to basic human needs: food, water, heating, shelter, work. The massive humanitarian catastrophe that has resulted from the scale of the DPRK's reign of terror has affected all of the DPRK's neighbours and threatened regional stability. There is a lethal restriction on the freedom of expression. One witness told the Commission that no one would dare object to the harsh living conditions in the DPRK, and I quote, as protest is equivalent to death. The citizens of the DPRK are forced to denounce conduct that is perceived by the regime as a threat to it. Family members must report on each other. The regime's vast surveillance apparatus ensures harsh punishment, even summary execution for those who don't comply. The extreme militarization of the DPRK has come at a devastating cost. The North Korean people have paid for the world's fourth largest standing army and the development of nuclear weapons and an increasingly sophisticated ballistic missile system to deliver them with mass starvation and deprivation. The Commission estimates that the DPRK devotes up to 25% of its gross national product to defence expenditure. And yet the Commission also finds malnutrition and starvation in the DPRK could have been avoided through even a marginal redistribution of state military spending. The Commission also found an entrenched pattern of discrimination based on the uniquely harsh Songbun class system, which is systematically applied to maintain control against perceived threats, both external and internal. Likewise, the extreme restrictions on the freedom of movement within North Korea and across its borders are designed to maximise state control. Punishments for violations are severe, often vicious and inhumane. Women who are subjected to horrific discrimination resort to international traffickers to escape. The torture they endure if they return cannot be regarded as a solely domestic concern. One of the cruelest policies of the regime is the system of arbitrary detention and political prison camps. An estimated 80,000 to 120,000 are imprisoned without trial in 4 political prison camps, and the Commission found that the majority, including children, had no prospect of ever being released. Summary executions and other cruel extrajudicial punishments are meted out for violations of camp rules. Torture is routine. As the Commission notes, and I quote, "The limited information that seeps out from the secret camps creates a spectre of fear among the general population, creating a powerful deterrent against any future challenges to the political system." The Commission found that the information it received established that crimes against humanity have been committed in the DPRK pursuant to policies established at the highest level of the state. We strongly support the Commission's conclusion that the international community must accept its responsibility to protect the people of North Korea from crimes against humanity because the DPRK government has manifestly failed to do so. The gravity, the scale and the nature of these human rights violations distinguishes North Korea as a state that, in the Commission's words, has no parallel in the contemporary world. The need for an international response could not be more obvious. This view is clearly shared by the majority of UN member states, who last Thursday adopted Resolution 69/188 in the General Assembly, which submitted the Commission's report to this Council for consideration and action. This is broad recognition by the UN membership that this Council has a responsibility on this issue, including to assure accountability for the crimes being committed. These crimes are integral components of the DPRK political system. We must assume that crimes against humanity will continue if there is no international response. A core element of the Commission's mandate was to ensure accountability for human rights violations, in particular where such violations amounted to crimes against humanity. The Commission asked this Council to refer the situation in the DPRK to the International Criminal Court. The General Assembly has called on the Council to consider this recommendation. Australia believes that the crimes against humanity documented in the Commission's report warrant the attention of the International Criminal Court. In the absence of any move by the North Korean regime to ensure accountability, the Council should seriously consider this recommendation. Mr. President, the North Korean regime does have the power to change its behaviour. Most of the Commission's recommendations are directed towards the DPRK itself. The DPRK's recent indications of a purported willingness to increase its cooperation with the international community on human rights were welcome, but those offers have since been withdrawn and there has been no sign of any internal reform. Instead, the DPRK has responded to the General Assembly's call for it to engage on human rights issues by denouncing that call and indicating it would engage in further hostile acts. When the DPRK responds to human rights criticisms with threats to use nuclear weapons, it only strengthens the link between the DPRK's human rights policies and their implications for international peace and security. Recent cyber attacks against international companies have been attributed to the DPRK. This is another example of the extraterritorial reach of their crimes, along with abductions of foreign nationals, and demonstrates the extent to which it is prepared to defy international norms and aggressively seek to destabilize other countries and international commerce. The international community's message to the DPRK regime is direct. It must change course. It can take steps immediately to put an end to all systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations being perpetrated in its country, which only further weaken the North Korean people and the stability of the state itself. It can commit to cooperate with the international community by extending full cooperation to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the DPRK, including by granting him full, free and unimpeded access to the DPRK, and by providing unfettered access to humanitarian agencies. There are options for the DPRK regime, humane options, and we will continue to press its leadership to embrace them. Assistant Secretary General Simonovic has alluded to some of these just a moment ago. But in the meantime, we are realistic about the brutal prospects for the North Korean people and what needs to be done to provide them a measure of protection. We continue to look to those countries that have most influence on North Korea, including those in the North Asian region and other partners, to continue to press the case for fundamental change to the DPRK state apparatus. We know, of course, that this will not be easy. To conclude, Mr. President, the Security Council must also live up to its responsibilities in the absence of action by the regime, particularly in relation to accountability for crimes against humanity. Given the scale of the human rights violations and their link to international peace and security, it is essential that the Council remain seized of the situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The Council must regularly assess this situation and give serious consideration to further action it might take, in the interest of the North Korean people themselves and in support of peace and security in their region and globally. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Australia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Assistant Secretary General Simonovic and Assistant Secretary General Zerahun, for your informative and appropriately bleak briefings, and for the ongoing attention that your respective teams give to the situation in the DPRK in spite of persistent obstacles put up by the North Korean government. Today's meeting reflects the growing consensus among Council members and UN member states that the widespread and systematic human rights violations being committed by the North Korean government are not only deplorable in their own right, but also pose a threat to international peace and security. A major impetus for the Security Council taking up this issue was the comprehensive report issued in February 2014 by the UN Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry. The Commission of Inquiry conducted more than 200 confidential interviews with victims, eyewitnesses, and former officials, and held public hearings in which more than 80 witnesses gave testimony. Witness accounts were corroborated by other forms of evidence, such as satellite imagery confirming the location of prison camps. North Korea denied the Commission access to the country, consistent with its policy of routinely denying access to independent human rights and humanitarian groups, including the Red Cross and UN Special Rapporteurs. And despite repeated requests, the DPRK refused to cooperate with the inquiry. The main finding of the Commission's thorough and objective report is that, quote, systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations have been and are being committed by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, end quote. The Commission found that the evidence it gathered provided reasonable grounds to determine that, quote, crimes against humanity have been committed in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea pursuant to policies established at the highest level of the state, end quote. If you have not watched any of the hours of victims' testimony or read from the hundreds of pages of transcripts from the Commission's public hearings, I urge you to do so. They show North Korea for what it is, a living nightmare. A former prisoner of Prison Camp 15, Kim Yong-sun, said she and other prisoners were so famished that they picked kernels of corn from the dung of cattle to eat. She said, quote, "If there was a day that we were able to have mouse, that was a special diet for us. We had to eat everything alive, every type of meat we could find, everything that flew, that crawled on the ground, any grass that grew in the field," end quote. An Myong-chul, a former guard at Prison Camp 22, spoke of guards routinely raping prisoners. In one case in which a victim became pregnant and gave birth, the former guard reported that prison officials cooked her baby and fed it to their dogs. This sounds unbelievable and unthinkable, yet this is what a former guard told the Commission of Inquiry at a public hearing. His account fits a pattern across witness testimonies of sadistic punishments meted out to prisoners whose crime was being raped by officials. The Commission estimates that between 80 and 120,000 people are being held in prison camps like the ones where so many of these crimes occurred. Many who testified before the Commission were tortured as punishment for trying to flee North Korea. One man who was sent back to the DPRK from China described being held in prison cells that were only around 50 centimeters high, just over 1.5 feet. He said the guards told him that because the prisoners were animals, they would have to crawl like animals. A woman from the city of Musan told how her brother was caught after fleeing to China. When he was returned, North Korean security officials bound his hands and chained him to the back of a truck before dragging him roughly 45 kilometers, driving 3 loops around the city so everyone could see. His sister testified. When he fell down, they kept on driving, she said. Nor are the horrors limited to prison camps or those who try to flee. The Commission found, quote, "an almost complete denial of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, as well as of the rights to freedom of opinion, expression, information, and association in the DPRK." On December 18th, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution expressing grave concern at the Commission's findings and roundly condemning the DPRK's widespread and gross violations of human rights. 106 voted in favor, 20 against, and 53 abstained. The resolution also encouraged the Security Council to, quote, "take appropriate action to ensure accountability, including through consideration of referral of the situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the International Criminal Court and consideration of the scope for effective targeted sanctions against those who appear to be most responsible," end quote. The Security Council should demand the DPRK change its atrocious practices, which demonstrate a fundamental disregard for human rights and constitute a threat to international peace and security. We should take this on for 3 reasons. First, the DPRK's response to the Commission of Inquiry's report, and even to the prospect of today's session, shows that it is sensitive to criticism of its human rights record. Just look at all the different strategies North Korea has tried in the past several months to distract attention from the report, to delegitimize its findings, and to avoid scrutiny of its human rights record. The DPRK ramped up its propaganda machine, publishing its own sham report on its human rights record and claiming, quote, "the world's most advantageous human rights system," end quote. The DPRK tried to smear the reputations of hundreds of people who were brave enough to speak out about the heinous abuses they suffered, calling them, quote, "human scum bereft of even an iota of conscience," end quote. This was in a statement North Korea sent to the Security Council today. And North Korea launched slurs against the Commission's distinguished chairman, Justice Kirby. The DPRK deployed threats saying any effort to hold it more accountable for its atrocities would be met with, quote, "catastrophic consequences." All of North Korea's responses, the threats, the smears, the cynical diversions, show that the government feels the need to defend its abysmal human rights record. And that is precisely why our attention is so important. The second argument for exerting additional pressure is that when regimes warn of deadly reprisals against countries that condemn their atrocities, as the North Koreans have done, that is precisely the moment when we need to stand up and not back down. Dictators who see threats are an effective tool for silencing the international community tend to be emboldened and not placated. And that holds true not only for the North Korean regime, but for human rights violators around the world who are watching how the Security Council responds to the DPRK's threats. The DPRK is already shockingly cavalier about dishing out threats of staging nuclear attacks and has routinely flouted the prohibitions on proliferation imposed by the Security Council. In July, North Korea's military threatened to launch nuclear weapons at the White House and the Pentagon, and in March 2013, it threatened to launch a preemptive strike on the United States, saying, quote, "Everything will be reduced to ashes and flames," end quote. In the most recent example of its recklessness, the DPRK carried out a significant cyber attack on the United States in response to a Hollywood comedy portraying a farcical assassination plot. The attack destroyed systems and stole massive quantities of personal and commercial data from Sony Pictures Entertainment, not only damaging a private sector entity, but also affecting countless Americans who work for the company. The attackers also threatened Sony's employees, actors in the film, movie theaters, and even people who dared to go to the theaters showing the movie, warning them to, quote, "Remember the 11th of September," end quote. Not content with denying freedom of expression to its own people, the North Korean regime now seems intent on suppressing the exercise of this fundamental freedom in our nation. North Korea also threatened the United States with serious consequences if our country did not conduct a joint investigation with the DPRK into an attack that they carried out. This is absurd. Yet it is exactly the kind of behavior we have come to expect from a regime that threatened to take, quote, "merciless countermeasures," end quote, against the U.S. over a Hollywood comedy, and has no qualms about holding tens of thousands of people in harrowing gulags. We cannot give in to threats or intimidation of any kind. Third, the international community does not need to choose between focusing on North Korea's proliferation of nuclear weapons and focusing on its widespread and ongoing abuses against its own people. That is a false choice. We must do both. As we have seen throughout history, the way countries treat their own citizens, particularly those countries that systematically commit atrocities against their own people, tends to align closely with the way they treat other countries and the norms of our shared international system. On November 23, a week after the UN's Third Committee adopted its DPRK resolution, North Korea's military said, quote, "All those involved in its adoption deserve a severe punishment," end quote, and warned again of catastrophic consequences. Now here, presumably all would imply the more than 100 member states who voted for the resolution. The military also said that if Japan, quote, "continued behaving as now, it will disappear from the world map," end quote. When a country threatens nuclear annihilation because it receives criticism of how it treats its own people, can there be any doubt regarding the connection between North Korea's human rights record and international peace and security? North Korea did not want us to meet today and vociferously opposed the country's human rights situation being added to the Security Council's agenda. If the DPRK wants to be taken off the Security Council's agenda, it can start by following the Commission of Inquiry's recommendations to acknowledge the systematic violations it continues to commit, immediately dismantle political prison camps and release all political prisoners, allow free and unfettered access by independent human rights observers, and hold accountable those most responsible for its systematic violations. Knowing the utter improbability of North Korea making those and a long list of other necessary changes, it is incumbent on the Security Council to consider the Commission of Inquiry's recommendation that the situation in North Korea be referred to the International Criminal Court, and to consider other appropriate action on accountability, as 116 UN member states have urged the Council to do. In the meantime, the United States will support the efforts of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to establish a field-based office to continue documenting the DPRK's human rights violations as mandated by the Human Rights Council, as well as support the work of the Special Rapporteur, Both should brief the Council on new developments in future sessions on this issue. It is also crucial that all of DPRK's neighbors abide by the principle of non-refoulement, given the horrific abuses to which North Koreans are subjected to upon return, and provide unfettered access to the UNHCR in their countries. The United States will continue to welcome North Korean refugees to our country and help provide assistance to North Korean asylum seekers in other countries. It is reasonable to debate the most effective strategy to end the nightmare of North Korea's human rights crisis. What is unconscionable in the face of these widespread abuses and dangerous given the threat that the situation in the DPRK poses to international peace and security is to stay silent. Silence will not make the North Korean government end its abuses. Silence will not make the international community safer. Today we have broken the Council's silence. We have begun to shine a light, and what it has revealed is terrifying. We must continue to shine that light for as long as these abuses persist. Today's session is another important step, but far from the last, towards accountability for the crimes being perpetrated against the people of North Korea. The Council must come back to speak regularly about the DPRK's human rights situation and what we can do to change it for as long as the crimes that brought us here today persist. That is the absolute minimum we can and must do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank Mr. Tayyip Brooks-Zaroun and Mr. Simonovic for their briefings. What they have described for us today backs up the information contained in the report of the Commission of Inquiry chaired by Mr. Kirby. The work carried out by this Commission of Inquiry is not only outstanding in terms of its quality, but of course it's most welcome. It has provided us for the first time with a comprehensive overview of the violations committed by the North Korean authorities over 50 years, committed within the framework of policies decided upon at the highest level of the state, as stated in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. This last has thus shed light on a horrifying mechanism, that of the regime of Pyongyang, used to subjugate its people. It would not be possible today to list a complete litany of all these crimes: murders, arrests, arbitrary detention, generalized use of torture, kidnapping, rape, enforced disappearances, slavery, impeding humanitarian access, and of course the use of famine. And the list remains lengthy, unfortunately. Hundreds of thousands of political prisoners have died in the camps over the past 50 years. 80 to 120 political prisoners are currently being held. These violations affect men, they affect women, and they don't even spare children. The murderous folly of the regime seems to know no limits. The Council has finally convened and gathered to hear the cries of distress of the victims of a bloodthirsty regime. Furthermore, these crimes are carried out and committed in the obscurity of absolute censorship. North Korea is closed off to international media, to human rights defense organizations, as well as to the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The Commission of Inquiry didn't have access. Mr. President, we cannot remain silent in the face of this nightmare. Those responsible for this terror, and first and foremost the North Korean authorities, should be held to account for their crimes. The crimes committed will not go unpunished. It's a moral obligation for the international community, as was underscored by Mr. Simonovic. There is no doubt that these crimes, in terms of their severity, in terms of their scale, in terms of their systematic nature, are all crimes against humanity. The recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry that the situation be referred to the ICC is one which should therefore be considered carefully by this Council. The Court is the very guarantee of equitable and effective justice. The fight against impunity, both today and tomorrow, of justice for the victims and future reconciliation are all at stake. The High Commissioner for Human Rights also has a role to play. His office on the ground, which is currently being set up in Seoul, should enable us to monitor the recommendations of the report and developments of the situation. You'll also have to continue to gather information on violations committed, and we would like to have the Council be briefed regularly. Mr. President, violations committed by the regime are a threat to international peace and security. They are part, indeed an essential component, of a dangerous totalitarian political system destabilizing the whole of the region. According to the words used by the Commission of Inquiry, the severity, the scale and the nature of these violations reveal what is a unique state in today's world. A state unique in terms of terror, a pariah state vis-à-vis the international non-proliferation regime, both nuclear and ballistic. A state which exports, in breach of this Council's resolutions, sensitive goods and technologies, which then serve to finance the indecent lifestyles of their leaders and the repression of a population regularly struck by famine. The Security Council could no longer ignore these crimes, which shock mankind's conscience. It was our responsibility to seize this issue. By holding this meeting today, the Council has sent a clear message to the torturers in Pyongyang. The lead weight, too long held above the heads of a people and country cut off from the rest of the world, must be lifted. North Korea's reality is now obvious to all. The Security Council has been seized. Nothing, not even the nuclear blackmail of the North Korean regime used to dissuade us from convening this meeting, will now keep us from considering the situation. The regime in Pyongyang must take its responsibility before history and the condemnation of the international community. The violations must now come to an end. Political prisoners must be released. The country must open up to international media, to NGOs, and finally to the United Nations. We cherish the hope that instead of launching into a new cycle of provocation and repression, as it always does, the North Korean regime will hear our message and finally choose the path of openness, of reconciliation and peace. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant.
I'd like to thank the representative of France for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My delegation thanks ASG Zeruhin and ASG Simonovic for their briefings. Nigeria regards human rights as being essential to ensuring that all human beings live in dignity. We also, all states, have an obligation to promote and protect the rights of their citizens. As one of the three core pillars of the United Nations, the organization has put in place appropriate mechanisms for promoting and protecting human rights across the globe. These mechanisms include special procedures, the Universal Periodic Report, Review, UPR, and treaty bodies. Nigeria notes that the DPRK participated in the first and second circles of the UPR. We also note that the roving ambassador of the DPRK met with the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the DPRK in October. Nigeria encourages the DPRK to maintain and indeed strengthen its engagement with the Human Rights Council and the treaty bodies with a view to promoting and protecting the rights of its citizens. I thank you, sir.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Nigeria for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Luxembourg. Thank you, President. I should like to begin my remarks thanking you for having been willing to take those steps necessary for the situation in the DPRK to be formally included in the Council's agenda, and for this public briefing be held at the behest of 10 member states and members of the Council, including my country, Luxembourg. I thank ASG Taye Bruk-Zereun, as well as ASG for Human Rights, Ivan Simonovic. I thank them for their briefings on the situation in the DPRK and the consequences thereof on international peace and security. Over the last decade, the DPRK has methodically flouted international law, undermining the nuclear non-proliferation regime and defying the decisions of the Security Council. ignoring its international obligations. The DPRK has proceeded since 2006 with numerous ballistic and nuclear tests. The country has refused to engage in a constructive dialogue with the international community and continues to offer regular threats of nuclear strikes. This exacerbates the risk of conflict and constitutes a threat to international peace and security. No one can deny this. But there's more, and just as grave, the DPRK seriously violates for many decades and on an unrivaled scale the most elemental rights of its people. This is documented methodically with rigor and transparency in the damning report published on 7 February by the Commission of Inquiry created by the UN Human Rights Council to look into the human rights in the DPRK. I will not run through the macabre list of atrocities committed by North Korea. This would make us all nauseated. I would like, however, to underscore 3 points that come out in the detailed report of the COI. First, the series of violations that have been noted by the COI are within and covered by international law and the Rome Statute for the ICC. This shows the existence of crimes against humanity. Secondly, the authors of these crimes benefit from full impunity as these actions are taken within the framework of policies ordered by the highest level of the state. Third, these violations hit without the most vulnerable sectors of population. Women, first, who are subjected to systematic discrimination and intolerable abuse, often sexual abuse. Children, secondly, are the first victims of famine, and they're not spared by the political camps. I would like, along these lines, to note the testimony of Mr. Shin Dong-hyuk, who escaped one of these political camps, camp number 14. His testimony concerns a small girl of 7 years of age who had the audacity to pick up grains of cereal to quash her hunger. And I will quote from paragraph 772 of the report, and I quote, 2 times a week, a guard would choose a child and subject that child to an inspection to ensure that that child had not stolen or hidden anything. A child of 7 years had the bad luck of being chosen for this inspection. In her pocket there were grains of cereal. The guard asked where they came from. The girl responded that she had picked them up in the street. There was a wooden stick that the guard, or club that the guards tended to use, and the guard said at that point, "That's not what I taught you. You do not respect my teachings." The girl was beaten with a level of violence that led to her falling unconscious. We had to carry her home to her mother. The next day, when she did not show up at school, we found out that she had died. President, we cannot separate the bellicose posture of the DPRK on the international front from the revolting human rights situation that reigns domestically, or from the instigation, or that comes at the instigation of the leaders of the North Korean regime. Respect for human rights is a hallmark of a stable society willing to live in peace with its neighbors. Inhumane living conditions imposed on large sectors of the population of North Korea represent, over time, a risk to the stability of the country, and based on that, the entire region. Hence, it is essential that the Security Council consider the recommendations contained in the Commission of Inquiry's report. One of these recommendations, which is mentioned explicitly in the resolution on the situation, on the human rights situation in the DPRK, adopted by a large majority of the UNGA on 18 December last, calls for the ICC to be seized of this matter. Luxembourg fully supports this recommendation, as it is absolutely essential that those responsible for these atrocities, unequaled in our contemporary times, committed by the DPRK, to use the language of the Commission of Inquiry, be held to account for their acts. We believe also that the Security Council should consider the adoption of targeted sanctions against those who are most responsible for these crimes against humanity committed in the DPRK. We also invite the North Korean authorities to authorize the visit of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the DPRK without delay and within respect for the modalities of the United Nations applicable to fact-finding missions. This would be the sign that the DPRK authorities are sincere in their willingness to cooperate with the special procedures of the Human Rights Council, the HRC. Further, given the scale of the discrimination suffered by women, given the scale of the violation and abuse that they are victims of, we believe that UN Women should be officially seized of this matter and act within the scope of their competencies. President, today's meeting, a first of its kind, should not be without a follow-up. Now that this item is on the Security Council's agenda, we encourage the Council to regularly be briefed in the future on the situation in the DPRK. The briefings that we have heard today have strengthened our conviction that it is the duty of the Council to closely follow the changing situation, which has an intrinsic link to peace and security, development and respect for human rights, to paraphrase Kofi Annan. To conclude, I should like to hail the work of the Commission of Inquiry, Justice Kirby, Madam Vizerko, and Marzuki Daruzman. They have been able to bring us to look at the reality of North Korea through the lens of the mistreated, the powerless, and the voiceless, and those excluded by the regime. Their work, the work of the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, and today in the Council, have allowed for a voice to be given to those without voice in the DPRK. The international community, and this is our message, is not deaf to the suffering of these people. We will not abandon them to their sad fate. They are worthy of our attention and our support on an ongoing basis until they are allowed to leave this ordeal. I thank the representative of Luxembourg for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Jordan.
Thank you, sir, for organizing this important meeting. Thanks and appreciation goes to the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs and the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights on their briefings on the situation in DRP and DPRK. Although most of those who took the floor depended on limited sources of information and due to the impossibility of carrying out investigation and inquiry in the PRK in order to find firsthand the facts in that country. However, we find that the picture is very bleak regarding the situation in the DPRK. The situation there constitutes a menace to the international peace and security. This is abundantly clear by the threat to carry out new nuclear experiments or develop new ballistic missiles or to test their launch. All those constitute grave violations of Security Council resolution and the UN Charter, or through the commission of grave and systematic violations of international humanitarian law and human rights nearly every day. All this also includes the violation of the right to food, to the right to movement and expression, in addition to the forced disappearances and torture and inhuman treatment in the political detention camps. The Security Council should not ignore the situation in the DPRK. It should make every effort in order to put an end to the serious violations of human rights and international humanitarian law there in that country, and to put an end also to the use of nuclear weapons and the threat of use of such weapons. In closing, we call on DPRK to take tangible and speedy actions in order to meet the concerns of the international community by allowing the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to visit DPRK and to permit the humanitarian agencies to work inside the country. I thank you, sir.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Jordan for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Assistant Secretary Generals Zerihun and Simonovic for their appropriately bleak briefings. In February this year, the international community received a wake-up call to the truly shocking violations of human rights in the DPRK. In a 400-page report, the UN Commission of Inquiry provided an unprecedentedly detailed insight into the appalling situation in the DPRK. Due to the DPRK's consistent refusal to cooperate or allow access to the country, the Commission instead gathered extensive first-hand testimony from witnesses and victims now living outside the DPRK. What they heard painted a picture of authorities who are so frightened of losing control that indoctrination begins in the kindergarten. So scared of what will happen if ordinary people get a glimpse of the outside world that just owning a tunable radio is a criminal offense. So insecure that religion is seen as a sign of divided loyalties and an act of treachery. The Commission's report describes a regime so paranoid that punishments are extended to whole families, so cruel that those fleeing for a better life are imprisoned, tortured, and sexually violated, so callous that it stood by and let hundreds of thousands die from starvation rather than ask for international assistance. The Commission concluded that the systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations being committed in the DPRK were components of a totalitarian state without parallel in the contemporary world. They called on the international community to protect the people of the DPRK, given the regime's manifest failure to do so. The international community cannot ignore such detailed and grave findings. Since the report issued, we, alongside international partners, have worked to ensure that the Commission's report is a beginning and not an end. The setting up of an OHCHR presence in Seoul is a practical demonstration of the international community's determination not to forget the people of the DPRK. This field office will continue the Commission's work of evidence collection as an important step towards accountability. It is a reminder to those at any level of the regime apparatus who are responsible for these awful human rights violations that the world is watching, and that they should consider themselves put on notice. If the DPRK fails to hold violators to account, the international community must be ready to do so. Both the UN Human Rights Council and the General Assembly have condemned in the strongest terms the findings documented in the Commission of Inquiry report, and have demonstrated the widespread concern across the globe at the enduring misery of the North Korean people. Both bodies, by overwhelming majorities, have encouraged the Security Council to consider the human rights situation in the DPRK. The United Kingdom supports the call for the Security Council to consider appropriate action to ensure accountability, including through consideration of a referral of the situation in the DPRK to the International Criminal Court. Mr. President, despite these calls from the UN membership, there were those that opposed discussion in the Security Council today. But the failure of states to abide by the universal principles of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms as set out in the UN Charter and the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a legitimate concern of the Security Council. Human rights, democracy, and strong institutions founded on the rule of law are essential. Without these key foundations in place, peace and security are at risk, both in individual states and in the wider international community. That is why the United Kingdom is pleased that the situation in the DPRK has been added to the agenda of the Council today, and that we have been able to have this long overdue discussion. It is a signal to the DPRK authorities of the international community's focus on the issues highlighted in the Commission of Inquiry's report. Our message to the authorities in Pyongyang is this: listen and engage with these concerns. The majority of the recommendations in the Commission's report are directed towards the DPRK government. It is the DPRK government that holds the power to transform the lives of its people for the better. Rather than continuing to deny the existence of human rights violations and refusing to engage with the international concerns, we urge them to accept and to address them seriously. We are disappointed that the DPRK responded to the recent Third Committee resolution by withdrawing their previous offers of dialogue and their invitation to the UN Special Rapporteur on DPRK to visit the country for the first time. The United Kingdom urges them to reconsider. If done fully and without preconditions, these would be first positive moves towards taking the bold step of admitting that there are problems and making a genuine effort to improve the human rights situation on the ground. The DPRK has an opportunity. The United Kingdom, like so many in the international community, stands ready to adjust our position in response to any concrete steps that the DPRK takes to improve human rights in the country. But if the DPRK continues to flout the obligations they owe to their people, then the international community should be ready to take further steps to address the situation. We urge the Council to remain seized of this matter. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, China has stated its position against the Council's involvement of the human rights issues in the DPRK. China has been consistently against politicization of human rights issues and against imposing pressure against other countries with the pretext of human rights issues. The Security Council is not a forum to discuss human rights issues. We oppose adoption of any outcome document by the Council on the human rights situation in the DPRK. China is a close neighbor of the Korean Peninsula. We will never allow any turbulence or war taking place in the peninsula. At present, the situation in the Korean Peninsula remains complex and sensitive. We hope that members of the Council and relevant parties place the overall interest of denuclearization and the maintenance of peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula as a priority, exercise restraint, and do more that are conducive to the easing of tension, avoid mutual provocation, and refrain from any rhetoric and actions that may lead to the escalation of tension. China will continue to work for the realization of a denuclearized peninsula, maintain its peace and stability, and address issues through dialogue and consultation. This position is clear and firm. China hopes that the relevant parties will make concerted effort to take real actions to create conditions for the relaunch of the six-party talk, with a view to jointly maintaining the overall situation of peace and stability of the peninsula. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of Chile. We thank ASG from Political Affairs, Mr. Taye Brooks Serehun, and the ASG for Human Rights, Mr. Ivan Simonovic. We thank them for their briefings. We also thank the Chad presidency for facilitating the inclusion of the situation in the DPRK in the Council's agenda. As one of the promoters of this meeting, Chile believes that this discussion is timely and necessary. The beginning of the year saw the publishing of the report from the Commission of Inquiry established by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. This established the existence of systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations in the DPRK that, in many cases, constitute crimes against humanity. It is important to underscore the agreement and convergences in the reports of the Commission of Inquiry, of the Special Rapporteur, of the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. They point at the same conclusion, that is to say, the critical situation of human rights in the DPRK. How did Pyongyang react to the debate generated on this topic? Dismissing it, alleging that it is a political conspiracy and an international smear campaign. That government also affirmed in written form in a letter to the Secretary General dated 24 November that it could launch a new or undertake a new nuclear test. This is a clear threat to international peace and security. Mr. President, it is of grave concern that the DPRK continues to develop its nuclear program as well as its delivery systems at the great cost of the humanitarian situation for its people, despite the sanctions regime established pursuant to Resolution 1718. This strengthens our conviction that we must adopt a broader focus that allows for us to prevent a new conflict on the Korean Peninsula, which would have regional and global consequences and scope. It is clear that the approach under which we have worked so far is not enough. Collectively, we must bring greater pressure to bear. President, it is essential that the appropriate measures be adopted to put an end to the serious human rights violations included in the reports of the Secretary General, the Special Rapporteur, and the Commission of Inquiry. These measures must put an end to the climate of impunity in the DPRK. This must allow for accountability. We urge the DPRK to correct or to offer access to the Special Rapporteur to their country in the terms of reference of the United Nations for these special procedures. That is to say, freedom of movement and interviews with security arrangements made for the Special Rapporteur and those whom he interviews. Given the gravity of the situation in the DPRK, we believe that this first meeting under a new agenda item is a measure that is headed in the right direction. This is an initiative that we support, and that we supported in the meeting of the Security Council under the area formula last April. We hope that this can be repeated regularly. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of Chile for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, at the outset, let me thank you for acting on a letter co-signed by 10 council members from all 5 regional groupings of the UN, which include Rwanda, requesting that the situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea be formally placed on the agenda of the Security Council. I also thank Assistant Secretary Generals Taye Brooks Serehun and Ivan Simonovic for their respective briefings. Rwanda, as a country that suffered the worst violations of human rights in 1994, which were planned and perpetrated by the then ruling regime, values meetings like this, which are meant to attentively examine situations of gross violation of human rights. Early 90s, the UN Secretariat and its council didn't pay much attention to all signals that were announcing the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Therefore, 20 years later, Rwanda, as a member of the Council, has to stand with the victims and ensures that the international community, which we are part of, is determined to act upon its responsibility to protect and is committed to hold the perpetrators to account. The three pillars of the responsibility to protect, as stipulated in paragraphs 138 and 139 of the outcome document of the 2005 World Summit, provides that the state carries the primary responsibility for protecting populations from genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. The international community has a responsibility to encourage and assist states in fulfilling this responsibility, as well as a responsibility to use appropriate diplomatic, humanitarian, and other means to protect populations from these crimes. If a state is manifestly failing to protect its population, the international community must be prepared to take collective action to protect populations in accordance with the UN Charter. We believe that the Security Council should engage the DPRK on the basis of these pillars. Mr. President, Rwanda takes note with great concern of the report of the Commission of Inquiry, which was established by the Human Rights Council on 21st March 2013, with the mandate to investigate and report on the human rights violations in the DPRK. We were alarmed by the findings of the Commission, which documented several crimes, including extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortions, and other sexual violence, persecution on political, religious, racial, and gender grounds, the forcible transfer of populations, enforced disappearance of persons, and the humane act of knowingly causing prolonged starvation, not to mention the abduction of Japanese citizens, including children, over the past decades. And the Commission concluded these crimes amount to crimes against humanity, and I quote, reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world, end of quote. In the meantime, we deplore that the Commission was denied access to the DPRK and that competent authorities in that country didn't comment on the report of the Commission of Inquiry. However, we are encouraged to hear that recently the DPRK indicated willingness to allow access to its territory to the Special Rapporteur and accept technical assistance of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We hope that this opportunity will be pursued. Mr. President, given the situation, Rwanda, which on 18th December voted in favor of Resolution A/69/188 of the General Assembly concerning the human rights situation in the DPRK, believes that it was important that the Council be seized and receives further information from the Secretariat on this situation, as well as its implications on international peace and security. During our sessions, the DPRK should be invited to express its views in order to engage a genuine dialogue with this Council and the wider international community, which could lead to a better understanding and to a significant improvement of the human rights situation in the DPRK. Mr. President, Rwanda supports the Commission of Inquiry's recommendations aiming at fostering inter-Korean dialogue. We believe that maintenance of peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula and the resolution of disputes through dialogue and consultation are in the common interest of all parties. We urge all actors in the Korean Peninsula, particularly the DPRK, to engage in good faith in the efforts to create favorable conditions for resuming the stalled political talks and for achieving the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. To conclude, Mr. President, we hope that the Security Council will remain seized on the situation in the DPRK, and we would like to encourage the UN Secretariat and concerned UN agencies to positively engage competent authorities in the DPRK in order to addressing issues of great concern contained in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. I thank you.
I'd like to thank the representative of Rwanda for his statement, and now I'm going to give the floor to the representative of Lithuania.
Mr. President, I thank you for convening this open meeting at the request of 10 member states, including Lithuania. I thank the SG's Taye Brugzerihun and Ivan Simonovich for their briefings. Lithuania welcomes this public briefing on a situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. As other Security Council members who called for this meeting, we believe that the scale and gravity of human rights violations in the DPRK, as detailed in the report of the UN Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry, threaten to have a destabilizing impact on the region and the maintenance of the international peace and security. The 370 pages long report, based on extensive research and testimony, is a profoundly disturbing read, as we have heard from some of the quotes earlier in this meeting. Hundreds of thousands perished, a great deal more physically and psychologically maimed by the regime that, in the words of the Commission, seeks to dominate every aspect of its citizens' lives and terrorizes them from within. The very idea of a social contract between a state and its citizens is reduced to naught, with those responsible to protect the rights of North Koreans ruthlessly enforcing almost complete denial of their freedom of thought, religion, expression, information, and association. Extermination, enslavement, torture, forced abortions, prolonged starvation. The list seems endless, as no abuse is judged too harsh or inhuman by the regime. For decades, and even when mass starvation was claiming thousands of lives, the state gave precedence to military spending, engaging in a clandestine nuclear weapons program, buying and producing expensive military hardware. Nuclear weapons tests in 2006, 2009, and 2013, as well as provocative ballistic missile and rocket launches, have been condemned by the Security Council and recognized as a continuing clear threat to the international peace and security. As the Commission of Inquiry notes, the drive to be a nuclear state has had profound consequences on resource allocation, particularly as parts of the population were already food insecure. The report clearly indicates that crimes against humanity are being committed, conceived, and supported by the highest levels of the DPRK government. Political prisoners and their families perish in prison labor camps. Deprivation of food is used to control the population. Children are stunted by malnutrition. Humanitarian access is blocked to most affected regions. And torture is an inseparable part of the interrogation process. Those who manage to escape are often forcibly returned and invariably face persecution, torture, forced abortions, and arbitrary detentions. We took note of the indications by the DPRK that it was ready to consider human rights dialogues with international interlocutors, technical cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and a country visit by the Special Rapporteur. We are disappointed, however, to hear that DPRK is now retracting on those signals. We urge the country to engage with the international community and to allow unimpeded access to international human rights and humanitarian organizations, and to start implementation of recommendations by the Commission of Inquiry. As long as the human rights situation in DPRK continues to deteriorate, however, it is important to make sure that the international community is mindful of its responsibility to protect the population of DPRK, so manifestly and deliberately failed by its own government. In this regard, Lithuania welcomes the recent resolution of the UN General Assembly on the situation of human rights in the DPRK, which submits the report of the Commission of Inquiry to the Security Council. We also encourage the Council to follow General Assembly's recommendation and take appropriate action to ensure accountability, including through consideration of referral of the situation in DPRK to the International Criminal Court, and consideration of the scope for effective targeted sanctions against those who appear to be most responsible for acts that the Commission has said may constitute crimes against humanity. To conclude, Mr. President, let me reiterate the conclusion by the Commission of Inquiry that the crimes against humanity in DPRK will continue until the policies, institutions, and patterns of impunity that lie at their heart remain in place. The Security Council should therefore remain engaged in demanding DPRK authorities to initiate profound changes through implementation of the recommendations by the Commission of Inquiry without delay. The Council should track progress of such implementation by holding regular briefings of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and a Special Rapporteur to the Security Council. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We thank the ASG for Political Affairs, Taye Brooke Serhum, and the ASG for Human Rights, Ivan Simonovic, for their respective briefings. I'm not going to repeat what is already described in the report. However, I'm going to make more explicit the position of Argentina on this point. Argentina is following with grave concern the situation in the DPRK. Argentina has voted in favor of each of the resolutions adopted in the competent bodies, the Human Rights Council, and also in the third committee of the UNGA. Among the most recent, Resolution 25/25 of the Human Rights Council and Resolution 69/188 of the General Assembly. Both condemn, in the strongest terms, the gross, widespread, and systematic violations of human rights committed in this country, in the DPRK. However, we would like to also make clear that we believe that the inclusion of this item in the Security Council's agenda is an exception. Argentina reaffirms that the Security Council should focus on its specific mandate that it is given by the UN Charter, which responds to a strategic vision that establishes a clear division of labor between the different bodies of the UN. It is indicated that it is stipulated that the Security Council has the responsibility to hear matters of international peace and security. It would not contribute to the correct and proper functioning of the UN system for the Security Council to extend its work and its range of action. This exception, this decision, which is an exception founded on previous recommendations from the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, should not be a precedent that would extend this practice. However, as in the Human Rights Council, Argentina wishes to express its concern over the conclusion of the Commission of Inquiry that there are and have been systematic, widespread, and gross human rights violations. We deplore this. We are also concerned regarding the conclusion of the Commission of Inquiry of the existence of crimes against humanity. Argentina, Mr. President, has been maintaining in this council and in other fora that we are concerned over the nuclear and ballistic missile programs in the DPRK and the risks that these bring to the stability of the peninsula and the region, as well as its implications on international peace and security. Situations such as this recall to us the importance of diplomatic means, negotiations, political negotiations, for which reason we urge all parties and this council to redouble efforts to relaunch dialogue with an aim of bringing about a definitive solution to this question with a clear priority of declaring the peninsula free of nuclear weapons. As we see it, the government of the DPRK must protect and ensure the human rights of their population. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of Argentina for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We were against the initiative of convening today's meeting. We consider that it could lead to negative consequences from the point of view of upholding the effectiveness of the Security Council and other UN system bodies. The Council is often criticized that it increasingly spends its time on matters not within its remit. Today we provided yet more grounds for such criticism. Issues of respect for human rights should be considered not here, but at the Human Rights Council, the body which, with the active participation of many Security Council members, was created specially to discuss this issue, and has been granted with the necessary authority and expertise to do just this. And finally, it's quite superfluous to even mention that today's discussion is unlikely to promote international dialogue with DPRK participation on this issue, which the authorities of this country had earlier stated to be ready for. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President,
I'd like to express appreciation to the Chad presidency for convening today's meeting on the situation in the DPRK. We also thank Mr. Zerovich for their briefings on the human rights situation in the DPRK. It is unfortunate that despite the international community's efforts to address the human rights issues of the DPRK over several years, the situation has continued to worsen, ultimately warranting the Security Council's attention. Earlier this year, the Commission of Inquiry issued its landmark report that raised international awareness on the gravity of the human rights situation in the DPRK. Following the report's release, we at the United Nations have dealt with the issue in the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly. While the General Assembly has adopted multiple resolutions since 2005 on the human rights situation in the DPRK, this year's resolution was unique in that it contained recommendations on the Council's role in these efforts. Therefore, the Council's decision to place the situation in the DPRK on its agenda is a necessary starting point for further discussion and engagement. Such engagement is crucial as we now understand the human rights violations in the DPRK to be so systematic and widespread that they not only cause mass suffering among North Koreans, but also pose a threat to regional and international peace and security. The Council has taken necessary measures in other cases in the past where human rights violations were committed on a large scale to constitute a threat to peace and security. Likewise, the Council needs to pay due attention to the grave situation in the DPRK. In this regard, we would like to stress the COI's conclusion that many of the violations found in the DPRK amounted to crimes against humanity. It also recommended that the Council play a crucial role in ensuring accountability, including through considering referral of the DPRK situation to the International Criminal Court. In addition, my government takes serious note of the announcement of the US government on December 19th that North Korea carried out the cyber acts on Sony Pictures Entertainment and posed threats to movie theaters, which were also mentioned in Mr. Zerouin's briefing earlier. In this regard, we would like to express deep concern over such acts which seriously undermine the openness and security of cyberspace and escalate international tension. Mr. President, we believe that addressing the North Korean human rights issue is vital, not only in promoting human rights as a universal value, but also in maintaining peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula and in the region. In this context, the Republic of Korea has been working together with the international community to improve the human rights situation in the DPRK and to provide assistance to the North Korean people. We will redouble these efforts in the coming years. We urge the authorities of the DPRK to take steps to improve their human rights situation. As the DPRK previously expressed its willingness to do so, we hope that Pyongyang will begin engaging with the international community through human rights dialogues, including with a special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the DPRK, and through technical cooperation with the OHCHR. In closing, the Republic of Korea hopes that this Council will continue to play a vital role in ensuring that North Korean people will eventually be able to enjoy their inalienable human rights and fundamental freedoms. Mr. President, speaking at this meeting is probably my last duty in the Security Council. When we first came to the Council 2 years ago, one of the first issues we tackled was the DPRK's missile and nuclear issues. In the Council, my country have dealt with many issues we are not party to, with a view to contributing to the work of the Council. Yet somehow, our term on the Council started and is ending with the North Korean issue. This must be just a coincidence. But I'm saying this with a heavy heart, because for South Koreans, people in North Korea are not just anybody's. Millions of South Koreans still have our family members and relatives living in the North. Even though we never hear from them, even though by now the pain of separation has become a cold fact of life, we know that they are there, just a few hundred kilometers away from where we live. We cannot read what is described in the COI report without it breaking our hearts. We cannot watch video clips from North Korea without flinching at every scene. We cannot listen to stories of North Korean defectors without sharing in their tears, without feeling as if we are there with them experiencing the tragedies. Therefore, Mr. President, as we leave the Council with the debate on the DPRK's human rights, we do it wholeheartedly with an ardent wish for people in North Korea, our innocent sisters and brothers on the street, in the countryside, in the prisoners' camp, who are suffering for no reasons. We only hope that one day in the future, when we look back on what we did today, we will be able to say that we did the right thing for the people of North Korea, for the lives of every man and woman, boy and girl, who has the same human rights as the rest of us. Thank you.
Je remercie le
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. I will now make a statement in my national capacity as representative of Chad. I also wish to thank Mr. Taye Brugseroun, the ASG for Political Affairs, and Mr. Ivan Simonovic, ASG for Human Rights. I thank them for their briefings. The report from the COI on the human rights situation in the DPRK, as a great many of us have just said, has brought to the fore a situation marked by massive violations in this country, in the DPRK. The report covers systematic, widespread, and flagrant human rights violations that have been and are being committed by the DPRK. The report concludes that in many cases, these violations constitute crimes against humanity. The nature of these violations is, according to the rapporteur, inherent to the political system of the DPRK. Hence, the COI recommends urgent action from the international community in order to tackle the human rights situation in the DPRK, to include having the ICC seized of this matter. We also express our serious concern over the gravity of the situation. If the veracity of the information in the report is established, we must note that the authorities have rejected the report, as well as refusing access. Regarding these restrictions, the members of the COI have not had the latitude the inquiries were undertaken with a great many North Korean citizens outside of North Korea. Over 400 were interviewed. We call for prudence in order to avoid a politicization of the human rights matters, particularly when we know that vis-a-vis some situations where massive and flagrant violations have been committed and continue to be committed, the international community has not even had the courage to report as much. How do we explain this double standard? There are many examples that show the errors committed in the past by the Council in taking decisions, hasty decisions based on certain reports. The report indicates that the situation of human rights in the DPRK has existed throughout the entire history of the country. If this is the case, then we would ask, why has this not garnered the attention of the international community since then? To conclude, we call for the countries with an influence over the DPRK to help to clarify the allegations of massive human rights violations against the DPRK, in the DPRK, encouraging the independent members of the COI to have free access to the country and to leave the country. Along these lines, we call upon the DPRK to make a commitment to a direct and candid dialogue with the international community and the countries of the region. I thank you. And I now return to my role as President of the Security Council. The Security Council has concluded the item on this agenda, its consideration of this agenda item, and the meeting is now adjourned.